All right, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Ardent Wives podcast. Super excited today to come and bring you an expert. We have Dr. Keroack with us. He is a functional medicine doctor here in the Western Mass area, and I'm so blessed and lucky to know him. And we're just going to have a great conversation today about medicine, about the body, about hormones, about what does this mean? And we know, right? This may seem like a deviation because wait, you're the Ardent Wives and we talk about marriage usually, but we know that for us to step into our marriages, right? For us to step into our lives, we want to feel good. We need to feel good physically. And I really believe God cares about our bodies. He cares about how we step in, cares about decisions we make. So we want to equip you. So we're grateful. Dr. Keroack, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you very much for having me, ladies.
Yeah,
Yes.
and he and Tiffany are here. So we want to share a little bit about Dr. Keroack and who he is. So I think Tiffany's going to do that for us.
Okay, so Jen, although you pronounce Dr. K's name so well, I am just going to say Dr. K. So as a functional medicine physician, Dr. K knows that optimal health and balanced living is a realistic goal for every human being at every stage of life. Because of this, he is dedicated to assisting his patients in reaching their full potential in order to pursue life to the fullest. How amazing is that, right? I'm just thinking, what came to my mind then is John 10:10. It's like, yes, life to the full. He helped guide patients through foundational and personalized approaches to health that focus on dietary guidelines, activity regimens, stress management, and sleep management that are specifically designed for them. His credentials consist of being board certified in both internal medicine and functional medicine. He received his formal education from Amherst College, Springfield College, and Tufts University of Medicine. In addition to his formal training, he has obtained certifications in functional medicine, age management medicine, naturopathic, and integrative medicine from the Institute of Functional Medicine, as well as other amazing certifications. And he has also spoken nationally and internationally on weight loss, nutrition, fitness, and functional medicine. His combination of experience and training has enabled him to develop a comprehensive and complete approach to optimizing health, wellness, and vitality. So, Dr. K, welcome to the Ardent Wife podcast.
Thank you again for having me.
Yes.
I just want to say I am so grateful for doctors like you, because I know when I started my weight loss journey, I went to the doctor and he was so because they tell you before you start this fitness plan, consult with your doctor. And he was so condescending, and he was overweight himself. He didn't look like he was in the best of health. And the fact that you have all this training, and I feel like there's many doctors that aren't really well trained when it comes to nutrition and fitness, and they tell you go work out, but they don't really have much guidelines for that. So I'm just grateful for doctors like you. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I think so. You have an amazing book, Changing Directions, and then you created, for those that are on YouTube and seeing us, a Star of Wellness. So I thought it might be good if you just started there. Could you explain your Star of Wellness to our listeners, and they can get a little understanding of where you're coming from as we begin?
Sure. Like many fabulous ideas, the Star of Wellness started on a napkin and a pencil. I remember going through my certification process with the Institute of Functional Medicine, and it was extremely challenging. There were, I think, about 7 different modules that you had to go through. And what I didn't realize until module 5 is that all of these modules were interconnected. And the Institute really didn't sort of give you any hints that they were interconnected until you sort of had to figure it out. So I was sitting next to this woman, and it was her first time. And again, this was my 5th module. So I was now seeing overlap between the modules. And she leaned over and said, do you understand anything that's going on? And I said, I didn't when it was the first time. I said, but now I actually see how these things are interconnected. And she said, can you help me understand that? And I said, there are 5 factors that actually they focus in on. And these are the 5 factors, and those are the points of the star. We'll go over them individually. The reason the Star of Wellness came about was the aspect of my editor. And as I was going through the book, and she said, well, you talked about this component of these 5 aspects. There's 2 things I want to bring up. Is one, you talk about 2 other things that aren't connected to the 5, and you may want to come up with some sort of key or symbol that's associated with that. And what was interesting, I was like, well, I have a couple of things in regards to the aspects of disease states, and I was thinking, well, what's 5? I can make a pentagram, I can make a pentagon, or I could just make, and so I made the pentagram, but I mean, the pentagram is not really a symbol I wanted to be associated with, so I turned it upside down. It turned out to be a star. And as I started thinking about these particular components, the colors came to mind. I'll tell you a little secret as to how the colors came to mind. So at the top of the star is this concept of nutrition. And the nutrition color is black because as you bring in more processed foods and higher levels of refined sugars, you get this sticky phenomenon. And so the black is supposed to represent tar. And so it's a sticky phenomenon associated with nutrition. Next going clockwise is a blue point, and that's metabolism. And metabolism is really how we use energy in our body. It tends to be focused on a cellular organelle called the mitochondria, kind of like a battery in a cell. And when your energy isn't good, you get cold, and cold is associated with blue. Next on the list is inflammation. Inflammation is mostly housed in the gastrointestinal tract, although it can be circulating throughout the immune system. And when things are inflamed, they're hot. And so that's why it's associated with red. Next on the list is toxicity. And this gets a sort of a good and a bad rap in my field, because I think there's a lot of unmeasurable toxins that many of my colleagues will promote. But realistically, you have a liver, you have a kidney, you have a colon to keep your body clean. And so I sort of have this sort of slimy idea when things get dirty. And so that's why it turned out to be green. And then lastly, on the list going all the way around is oxidation or rusting. And rusting turned out to be, from a primary point of view, yellow. So those are the components. It's nutrition, metabolism, inflammation, detoxification, and oxidation. For lack of a better term, this is how the body goes wrong. And the problem is there's somewhere between 100,000 to 150,000 ICD-10 codes about the specific disease states that we can bill for in insurance. So that can be absolutely overwhelming, even for the providers. And this becomes a little bit more of a manageable state where you say, well, how can the body go wrong? Well, there's only 5 ways that the body can go wrong. Again, the 2 other things around the star were these other components, hormones and cardiovascular or metabolic syndrome. And my editor was like, well, you talk about this a lot. And I said, well, hormones is kind of a combination of metabolism and inflammation. And red and blue make purple. So the planet that we put around the star was purple to represent hormones. And then cardiovascular issues or cardiometabolic issues are really a combination of inflammation and oxidation, burning out and rusting out. And these lead to heart attacks and strokes and so on and so forth. And as it turned out, red and yellow make orange. So the planet is orange. And honestly, this is all God-given, because it really was, the random components about how we put the colors together. And it just turned out that I picked primary colors so that way I could make these planets. And realistically, this is the disease state as compared to the health state. So when you look at the symbol of my practice, the triquetra, which is an ancient symbol of the Trinity, we look at the mind, the body, and the spirit. Mm-hmm. And so this is a component of health, a healthy mind, healthy body, healthy spirit. And it really is, an underground symbol of the Trinity, because I really believe that human beings are a triune being made in God's image. And all 3 of those components need to be cared for in order to receive health.
So for our listeners out there, the book, The Star of Wellness, no, that's not the name of the book, right?
The name of the book is Changing Directions. It's the idea about taking control of your health and actually turning around. So in a weird way, almost repentance. Again, not that disease is sin, But realistically, Old Testament wise, disease is often associated with sin. And so we can look at that from a spiritual sense as well as a physical sense and a mental sense. What can I do to basically turn around or change directions in regards to my disease states? So the star is to basically say, this is what goes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And the triquetra is, these are the things you focus in on.
But the Star Wellness, that's inside the book. Like listeners, if they want to learn more about that, they can go out and get the book.
One of the things I had my publisher do actually is in the back part of the book, there is actually a bookmark that you can tear out, and it has the Star of Wellness on the bookmark.
Oh, that's awesome. And where can our listeners find your book?
So it's really standard components on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. If you either Google my name or the Changing Directions, you can actually find the copies of the book.
Awesome. And we'll put those links too down below. So if our listeners out there and you want to go get a copy of the book, the links will be in the description there.
Yeah, I got mine on Amazon, but it won't be here till Monday. So
Yeah, I did. I got mine too. I just got it on Kindle, so I got it instantly.
It's very kind of you. So.
Yes. So shifting gears just a little bit, with this being the Ardent Wife podcast, we have to ask how long you have been married and what you like most about your wife, love most about your wife.
Oh my goodness. All right. So I have been married now 25 years. So we just hit our silver anniversary. We had an incredible getaway to this sleeper town just outside of Boston that was more like the Cape. And I'm actually blanking on the name of the town. Winthrop, I think, was the name of the town. Winthrop. Oh my gosh, it was spectacular. And what do I love most about my wife? So this is a very interesting question, because if I say anything physical, it gives the impression that when she loses that physical attribute, I won't love her anymore. Correct? So husbands out there who happen to watch this, don't fall for this trap.
That's how you know he's been married for 25 years.
So I will tell you in complete truth, I love my wife because she is my wife. I love everything about her because she is her. And in a selfish way, I love her because she brings out the best in me. I would not be who I am today if it were not for Beth.
Yeah,
we have 3 children. I have a 20-year-old, a 17-year-old, and a 15-year-old. And it is one of the most extreme sports I have ever been engaged in. And it is absolutely the adventure that all men are seeking. I think the line, for those Disney fans out there, one of our family's favorite movies is The Incredibles. Really talking about the sort of the family unit. And there's this scene when the family has been captured, and Mr. Incredible has an epiphany moment where he says, "You are my greatest adventure," and I almost missed it. And I'm always struck by that, because I think as men, I can't speak to whether women have this, but as men, we are constantly seeking adventure, and we will often settle for adventure by proxy. And where marriage and family is the great adventure that God is calling us to.
Oh, wow. That's powerful.
And I love having that perspective here on the podcast too, because we've had our husbands on here, which was great, but it's nice to have that perspective from a godly man. So thank you for that encouragement. I don't know how many men watch this, but hopefully our wives will let her say, honey.
At least that part.
Yeah. And sometimes we can actually do the medical implications for the basic needs of men and the basic needs of women. I find I get to talk about that a lot in the practice. I think patients don't expect that that's going to happen, but the united front that should occur between husband and wife doesn't always occur, and that leads to a slow fracture of the physical health of both husband and wife. And finding out what the basic needs of men and the basic needs of women are, because I find that our dads and our moms didn't teach us that very well.
Absolutely.
Yes. And I think so most of the time we live our lives like as though they're not interconnected. Like my relationship with my husband is not going to affect my physical. Like that's in a box over there. This is in a box over here. And they're not related.
And so Western medicine really does specialize in compartmentalization. So we sort of think about a kidney or an eye or an ankle, And really, we don't tie all of that together. And there is, as you say, Tiffany, there's this component where there's a spiritual, there is a mental, and there's a physical component. And community is one of the big pillars that we'll talk about today, the 5 pillars that keep us strong and healthy. And community is one of them.
Mhm. I believe that.
Absolutely. As a trainer, I always tell I can't spot train. Like I have women who will interview with me and like, oh, I want to have arms and I want to have the legs,
Yeah.
and I'm like, no, it doesn't work like that, and I won't be.
And
providing that
spot
for you.
reduction is absolutely ridiculous too. Spot
Oh my
reduction. I
gosh,
just
yeah.
want to lose my belly, and it's just like, yeah, that's not even possible.
Yeah.
Like
That
so,
30-day belly blast fix
yep.
is not a fix for anybody, and you don't need to
And
fix
that's
yourself
and
anyway.
that
So that's the whole
soap that you
thing.
can buy on the internet that you just shower for, a month and your belly fat will go away. Probably doesn't work.
No, not at all. Yes. So I want to ask you a question because I've had I just want to ask you a question. I want to ask about intermittent fasting,
Okay.
and as well as what's popular right now, and don't know if it'll be popular when whoever's listening to this is, but there's a new drug, or not necessarily new, but just a trending drug, I should say, called Ozempic. Could you share about both?
Sure. So let's cover the components of intermittent fasting first. Intermittent fasting got its claim to fame by its founder, Walter Longo from Italy, who won the Nobel Prize in Science for intermittent fasting. He then developed a company called Prolong, or maybe it's Pro Life. I think it's called Prolong, which basically is a mimicking intermittent fasting company. And he has since become a multi-millionaire and has probably moved out of the world of science. What's really interesting is, for lack of a better term, what is said and what is not said, as many things in life are. And so this component of intermittent fasting really came out with the idea of improvements in longevity. So you would live longer if you did intermittent fasting. A concept called autophagy, which is where cells eat themselves, autophagy. And so this concept of partly live, partly dead zombie cells that were causing a lot of disease states would actually die out during intermittent fasting, and that only the strong would survive. So that would be beneficial. There were a lot of claims of improved weight loss and faster weight loss through intermittent fasting. And then there were also claims for improvements in the immune function in regards to intermittent fasting. Now, one would hope that the research that was done on human beings, but that was not the case. They were done on short-lived, yes, exactly, right? So I see the epiphany that's actually occurring. So these were done on short-lived animals like molds and fruit flies and worms. And so if I can get a 24-hour living fruit fly to live 27 hours by fasting the fruit fly, I don't necessarily know if I can extrapolate that to a human being and give them 20 more years of life. All right. So that's actually something that's not really in the public domain because it's not very marketable. So for about a year and a half, the intermittent fasting craze was hit the marketplace, and multiple people were doing it. And there were all these philosophies about 16 hours and 8 hours, and 24 hours, or 20 hours and 4 hours, or 3 days, or 1 day on and 1 day off, and all these components. Absolutely no scientific merit in regards to any of those timing components. About a year and a half after the Nobel Prize, a German research team decided to do a study with human beings, and they divided the groups of human beings between intermittent fasting and calorie restriction, old-fashioned calorie restriction, versus intermittent fasting. At the end of the year, they found that there was absolutely no difference between autophagy, longevity, or weight loss between the two groups. So what to take away from an intermittent fasting is that if you do cut your calories through intermittent fasting, you can gain a benefit from intermittent fasting. However, if you overload your food at the end of the day, you negate the component of intermittent fasting. Equally, if you can restrict your calories and not fast, you will still get the same benefits that you would have gotten from intermittent fasting. So I tend to think of intermittent fasting as a neutral tool that can help with individuals who have inconvenience. In other words, you have an incredibly busy morning because you're getting all your children ready for school and you've got to get ready for work. And like, I could gain a whole hour if I just didn't eat. Fantastic. The problem is starving, because God has some amazing pathways to help us live, quite frankly, because we have incredible techniques to try and help ourselves die, and so God has these incredible pathways to actually help us live. So as we put stress and strain on the body through intermittent fasting, certain aspects of survival kick in, not the least of which is cortisol. So this does not necessarily work for everybody. I find that intermittent fasting works better in low stress lifestyles than high stress lifestyles. So that's the intermittent fasting component. Is there anything else that we could or should cover in terms of intermittent fasting before we talk about these new medications in the marketplace?
Well, I have a quick question, because a lot of the diabetes, like some of the research that I've seen, and again, it could be not true, is with diabetes, the idea of intermittent fasting and diabetes and insulin and blood sugar being able to stay low for longer periods of time to help with diabetes. Can you speak to that at all?
So that will absolutely be true. What's interesting is that many of the studies that are done with that don't hold stable or steady for calories. And so when you go through these components, even when you start looking at trends of macronutrients, so I'm going to look at paleo, I'm going to look at keto, I'm going to look at Mediterranean, they don't hold steady for calories. And when other researchers go back and repeat the evidence and hold still for calories, they actually find out that it's the calorie restriction that has the biggest impact. So if you have an intermittent fasting group and a non-intermittent fasting group, so you have somebody eating 5 meals versus somebody eating 4 meals, let's say, in theory, the person eating 4 meals eats fewer calories, and the calorie restriction leads to the benefits of the cardiometabolic imbalances like diabetes. So is intermittent fasting helping? If calorie restriction is occurring, yes.
Right.
But if you do, I have some patients who believe that if they do intermittent fasting, they can eat 5,000 calories for the 8 hours with it, and it doesn't, you can't beat the laws of physics through some trickery. So it can work, but it has to stay within the laws of physics, basically.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so Ozempic, big out there right now, and I have some friends that are taking it, and they have lost a lot of weight over time. I think it's been a good 8 or 9 months at least, and I do see a big shift now. But what do we think?
This is a really fascinating drug that's actually a very, very small protein known as a peptide. So proteins are a long chain of amino acids, but if they reach a certain number, I'm sorry, I can't remember whether it's 60 or 100. If they're less than that, they're classified as a peptide. And so within our intestines, there are these cells called L cells, like longevity, the L cells. And L cells release glucagon-like peptide subcategory 1 or GLP-1, which is the drug that Ozempic and Mounjaro and Wegovy and Zepbound are. So you have this particular protein/peptide within your cellular mechanism already. And it sort of coordinates your food and your pancreatic secretion of insulin. So that way the timing meets up exactly at the right time. So when you eat, you chew your food and you taste your food, there are these beautiful cascades of chemicals that occur in your body that prepare your food for digestion. So in this particular example, the L cells will release GLP-1 to tell your pancreas to start getting ready to release insulin to be prepared for the food. And provided you are a reasonably healthy weight, this coordination goes on. But as you start gaining weight, and I do think that America and Western culture is incredibly successful in terms of food signals and making it very easy to have highly processed, palatable foods that we can become addicted to very quickly. And so as you sort of shift the components of healthy weight to unhealthy weight, the coordination of the GLP-1 in your intestines doesn't line up with the food component. And so there's a mismatch. And then you wind up gaining weight because there's a discoordination. Think of it like you and your partner dancing, and your partner is dancing to a foxtrot where you're trying to waltz. Something is just not lining up. And so science has basically found a way to put certain chemical groups on these peptides to make them last, not for the hour or two that they're supposed to last, but actually a full day or up to a full week. And yes, it's true, they are working on a GLP-1 agonist to last for an entire month. And so you have this coordination ability in your system that lasts for an entire week. So what this does is it coordinates the sugar and the food better than you could on your own. The other thing it does is it slows the motility of your gastrointestinal tract. So food doesn't move as quickly, so you feel fuller faster. The hope is that you will eat less. And here we come back to the idea of calorie restriction. So I'm eating less because of the medicine, and the calorie restriction leads to the weight loss. The problem is that this can have some dire side effects, not the least of which is nausea and vomiting, and sometimes intractable and hospitalization levels of that. And so what we do is we create an artificial coordination with these medications to help people coordinate their food and their insulin. The problem I see, because we work with these in the practice as well, the problem I see is that you will lose the same amount of muscle tissue as you will fat tissue in the process of weight loss. And Dee knows firsthand that muscle tissue is so important for metabolism. We really, in the process of losing weight, we would prefer not to lose muscle tissue to keep our metabolism going. Otherwise, we paint ourselves into a metabolic corner, in which case we have to stay on this intense calorie restriction for the rest of our lives. And this is the idea where if you don't stay on the medication, you're going to gain all your weight back. And the reason being is that if you're not aware of your nutrition and your activity, you will lose equal amounts of fat and muscle, lose metabolism, and then again paint yourself into a metabolic corner requiring fewer calories for a significant amount of time.
So what if you did incorporate strength training consistently with it?
We make sure that happens here in our practice. So we teach people the appropriate levels of calorie and macronutrient combinations. We teach them strength training. We really focus on aspects of keeping their muscle tissue. We have a machine that actually measures, estimates, I guess is a better word, estimates body fat, so we can figure out how much muscle tissue they have and how much fat tissue they have. And so when they come in and weigh themselves, we can say, you're losing weight, but you're losing muscle, so something's going wrong. And they may say, well, I'm only eating twice a day because I'm not hungry. And I say, well, again, starvation mechanisms are designed to lose muscle and not fat, so we want to create this interesting balance, I guess is the best word I can say, where we nourish people to feed their muscle tissue so that way they change their metabolism, and then their muscle changes their metabolism so they burn their fat. The Ozempic is very hard to beat, for lack of a better term. It works. So these GLP-1 agonists, the Mounjaro and the Ozempic, they're very hard to beat. But if you don't do the foundational factors, like I said, you can wind up being a bit of a metabolic mess when everything's said and done.
Yeah, and I think nutritional counseling is key too. I have a family member who's had gastric bypass, once she had the gastric bypass, afterwards was having dumping and doing those things because she just wasn't doing the nutritional things that she needs to do, and now is on Ozempic. And I'm afraid for her because she already has gastrointestinal issues from having the gastric bypass, from kind of abusing that, and now she's having issues with that and doesn't even have muscle tone to begin with because from being sedentary. So I feel like for doctors, like I personally don't think it's really responsible for them not to have them on a strength training regimen, on a nutritional counseling, if they're going to prescribe this drug to people. And I know from my family member, she doesn't have those things in place. And so it's just really frustrating because she's always had a weight issue, wants to lose the weight, but it's not healthy, I don't feel like.
And we think that as well. We try to set up a component where we have frequent visits and we educate people on that. The two jokes that I tend to tell people when they come in and want to lose weight, I say, I can cut off your leg and you'll lose weight, but that's not necessarily healthy. I equally can lock you in Turkish prison and give you bread and water. You will lose weight, but that's not necessarily healthy. So I'm in agreement with you that if you don't really have the foundational components about how to navigate life, and you rely on something else, you'll be disappointed at some point in time.
Yeah.
And when it comes to weight loss, most of the time we talk about something that's sustainable, right? Like you want to do something that you can do for the long term. Would you say that Ozempic is a long-term sustainable solution for weight loss?
So I'm gonna be a little political in terms of this answer. So the FDA will say, yes, it is. It is something that is prescribed, and it will be prescribed for lifelong components. And I think realistically, if an individual needs some sort of help, it can be used that way. What we do in the clinic is we attempt to get people not to the maintenance dose, but a lower than maintenance dose. And we try to get them off of the GLP-1 agonists as much as we can. So we don't have them stay on the maximum dose. We kind of teach them some aspects of their own personal responsibility, so that way they learn the components of, and these are the 5 pillars we sort of hinted at. They learn the components of sleep hygiene, of nutrition, of physical activity, stress management, and community. Because if those pillars are not in place, the drug will work to help you lose weight, but it won't be sustainable. The truth of the matter is, any intervention without sleep, food, exercise, stress management, and community, any intervention is really not going to be sustainable.
And I'm living proof of that, because I am now sustained 100-pound weight loss for 5 years. And so, but all of those components are very important part of my daily life, and is through education.
Oh
that I
yeah.
had to
I
give
mean,
them.
and to go back to the component of what the podcast is about, one of the things that I've heard that I use in individuals who will tell me that marriage is just a piece of paper, and I love my girlfriend, boyfriend, I don't need a piece of paper. I will say, you're absolutely foolish to think that your love will sustain your marriage. You need an entire community to help you sustain your marriage. You need to stand before 100 people and say, I am committing to this man, I am committing to this woman, and make those 100 people commit as well. That's what the marriage license is. It's the idea of standing up before a community and say, hell or high water, I am sticking with this person. Because your love is not going to do that, unfortunately.
No.
Great.
So again, these components, you ladies know, when you're sleep deprived, you're much more likely to fight with your husband. And when you're hungry, you're more likely to fight with your husband. And this is like, and if you're stressed and you're not moving, so like all these pillars are really going to be important for any long-term commitment.
Yes. Preach.
I know. I'm like, when I lack sleep, I'm in the pantry. Like, what kind
Right?
of
Yeah,
chocolate can I
exactly.
eat?
So this is the frightening
Dehydrated,
thing that
I'm
we
in
find
the
out,
pantry.
that people who, so there's 2 studies that I sort of refer with patients who say, they'd rather get up and work out than sleep. So individuals who sleep 6 hours a night weigh 20 pounds more than people who sleep 8 hours a night. And I tell them, wouldn't it be nice to just sleep your weight away? My goodness,
And
what a
sweat
deal.
it away, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
There's another study that I thought was really discouraging, where they put athletes on a calorie restricted program, and they had one group of athletes sleep 7 hours a night and one group of athletes sleep 8 hours a night. You figure that's not that much of a difference. I've done that, right? And they found that at the end of this 6-month component, the athletes that slept 7 hours a night lost the same amount of weight as those that slept 8, but the 7-hour group, 85% of their weight loss was muscle, and the 8-hour group, 85% of their weight loss was fat.
Wow.
So
And so
everybody be like
sleep,
Jennifer.
yeah.
Go to bed.
Yeah. So 8 hours, as much as people say, oh, I don't really need 8 hours, and you need fewer hours as you get older and yada yada, that's not what the science shows.
Yeah. I go to bed early, but I still struggle. And I just as you're saying that, I'm like, man, this is where the idea of margin and Sabbath come in, and not making yourself so busy. Because I can see in my life where I go to bed pretty early. I mean, 8:30, that's early. I feel kind of old, right? But I'm like, I wake up at 4, so I'm not getting 8 hours of sleep. And so I'm like, but part of that is margin. So I'm convicted and encouraged. So thank you.
Can I let you guys in on a secret about how I came up with many of the policies and protocols that we have here in the practice?
Sure.
Yeah.
It's actually Genesis 1.
Yeah. That's all you
So
need.
I had a really great sermon from, I want to say, Mark Driscoll, who's a pastor, I believe now in Arizona, talk about how God set up day and night, so you would actually go to bed. God set up food supply. God set up work environments. God set up, when he created animals, he set up community. And he set up this, as he described it, the nursery for his children, in such a way that there was patterns. And so, like, since we had no light bulbs in Eden, like, you slept when it was dark, and basically you had abundance in terms of food, and there were restrictions even back then that you couldn't eat everything. Theoretically, don't eat that. Basically, eat this, not that. It was basically the rule. And then there was a component of community, and there was a component of work. And I jokingly say, even all through the Old Testament, if you break the laws, you get spanked, you know. And there are these laws of taking a day off, and if you work 7 days a week, 365 a year, like, your health suffers, and you break the laws of the universe and you get spanked. So
Yeah.
I agree. I actually wrote a blog post about the 7 days of creation, and how that's the best wellness plan that you
Isn't it,
can
though?
manage. Like, you eat herbs and vegetables, you eat the meat, you drink the water, you get sun, all those things. And it was all in the first 7 days of
and
creation that God
and
created.
realistically, we're in a broken world, so we can't maximize that. But you, for lack of a better term, with the human existence, you do the best you can, and you
Right.
pray for grace, basically.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Take it to the Lord. Absolutely. So we're like teetering. We're going everywhere here.
That's okay.
It's
You
good.
guys can edit anything you want to.
Marriage, creation,
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
fitness,
So
wellness.
that's
I'm
the
gonna bring it
components of the
back to
drugs. I think there's a
metabolism.
role.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes people come in and they are absolutely stuck, you know, and I want to be respectful about individuals who are
Yes.
absolutely stuck in addiction and downward spirals, and this, like, they need something more to start the upward momentum of getting out.
Right.
And that's where we see the role of the Western medicine component.
Right.
So I mean, when it gets to a point where someone has been on it for 6 months, a year, or something like that, I say, you know, when you walk over to a young tree and you see braces around the tree, you look and you say, oh, well, that makes sense, because the tree is going to need that to grow.
Mm.
When you go around and you see 100-year-old oak with braces around it, you say, something's wrong with that tree. It must be sick. And so there comes a component where, like, we have to take the training wheels off the bike and see what you can do.
Yeah, that's good. So I'm gonna go back to metabolism, and the tree analogy was great. Is it true that your metabolism slows as you age, even if
We
you're active?
we really, really hoped that that was the case. So that way, when we turned 40, we could say, well, that just has happening to me, right?
That's what I'm
'Cause
asking.
yeah. And so basically where was it? In 2021, sorry, I'm looking at my notes here. In 2021, Science did a article to look at metabolism changes from birth to death, to basically see what actually happens. And there is this massive metabolism change from birth to, like, 2 years old or 3 years old. And any of you women that have children can attest to that, because they are just eating machines during that time frame and growing machines between ages 0 and 2. Like, you couldn't imagine the physical change. That's why you take pictures of your baby every month, basically, because they're actually changing at that point in time. There's a drop off of metabolism until about age 20. And then the unfortunate truth is that your metabolism stays the same from ages 20 to age 60. And then it drops off a little bit at age 60. So the hope that your internal metabolism is why things have changed is been scientifically shown to not be true.
So tell me what happens when you turn 40.
Yeah, so
Because
what's
it's
the season?
What is that about? And how do I break that contract and get a new one?
Right.
So I suspect, and it's not the answer you're looking for, nobody knows. So I will tell you my opinion about what I think happens between what I see as age 35 to 55, because that's where I start seeing most of my patients coming in talking about the changes that have occurred. This didn't happen when I was in college. This didn't happen in the early parts of my job. When I turned 35, fill in the blank. And so when you look at the component of life challenges, okay, when you look at the component of life challenges, I think that there is a tipping point at age 35. So I think men and women are getting married later. I think that's the statistic there, or not at all, for that matter. When we look at career goals, usually you are working your tail off in your 20s to get some sort of position and stability. 35 is about the time when you reach cruising altitude in terms of stability of your position. And that's usually when you have the greatest amount of responsibility in the job, and therefore you have more work commitment. You may equally start having children sort of in your early 20s to mid 30s. And so now you have given up, when this is a really interesting statistic you can share with your husbands, when husbands become dads, they give up 50% of their leisure time. But when wives become mothers, they give up 90% of their leisure time.
Mm.
And so now the thing that you used to do to move and burn calories and enjoy life, stress management, 90% of that now is gone. The other thing that would be relatively interesting is I don't know necessarily if this happened in the 20s and in the 40s or even in the 60s. It seems to be more of a modern problem. And so I think that I don't want to make any assumptions, but realistically, you walking down the supermarket when you ladies were 5 is very different than when you were walking down the supermarket aisles now. I have fond memories of my mom taking me to the A&P down to, and the cereal aisle containing cornflakes and Rice Krispies, and that's it. So I think that our food industry is very different. I think that we give up leisure time significantly, and our stress levels become much more real. I mean, again, I don't know which one of you have children and which ones don't, but when you talk to the stress levels I've got high schoolers, when I talk to the stress levels of a high schooler and the eye roll says it all. When you talk to the stress levels of a high schooler, I internally say I would love to have that as a stressor right now. I would love to have that as a stressor right now. So I think stress, food, and activity, free time activity absolutely changes somewhere in our mid 30s.
Mhm.
And then I also find, and I hope this isn't insulting, I find that there's a certain level of frustration and complacency that occurs where it's just, well, this is just the way it is. This is just how life is. It's happening to all my friends, and all my friends tell me the same thing. And so I guess this is just my destiny.
And I feel like there's a freedom in what you're saying to say, oh, wait a minute, I can take personal responsibility and I can do something about it.
Right.
And so I love that. I love this answer, and I love the truth, because it's the truth sets us free. And I do hear it a lot. Like, oh, it's got to be last year I've lost about 15 pounds in the past year. And I last year had my doctor, you have to check. And he thought I was crazy. I'm like, no, you have to check my hormones, right? Because I swore that was true. But I think my stress levels were high. There was a lot of things going on, and so but there's a freedom in that of like, no, wait a minute, I get to take responsibility for my life and the choices that I'm making and do something about it. And there are things to do. And your 5 pillars are a part of that. So I hope that that's encouraging for people as they hear the truth of that answer,
And the thing that I see is that when we go to Aborigine societies, I hope that's not an insulting component, or provincial societies as compared to Western societies, where we go into fishermen and farmers and sort of the blue zone components of where people are living, kind of pseudo off the grid. They don't have the problems that we do.
They also don't have the processed food. They move their bodies as a lifestyle. They live in community.
I got to climb hills and carry goats around all day. Like, it's going to be a lot different than sitting at a desk.
Right.
But in fairness, I really want to point out the idea, in fairness, around 35, probably 40, there are absolutely shifts in testosterone levels for both men and women, and probably a little bit earlier growth hormone levels in men and women. Equally, the components of shifts of estrogen are going to play a role in that. So hormones, in fairness, do play a fantastic role in muscle building capacity. This is why, there are performance enhancing drugs that are founded in growth hormone or testosterone, because protein synthesis, muscle building, and fat loss can be improved or augmented by growth hormone and testosterone. And there does come a point in time where we start losing about 1% per year, probably starting in our mid 30s or early 40s.
So what exactly happens to our hormones?
So for women, the theory is that you're born with a set of eggs or ovum that you're going to have for your life, and you will at some point in time ovulate them out, for lack of a better term. And that probably occurs as early as 45, but in the decade of 45 to 55, 90% of women will, I guess it's a term I'm coining now, ovulate out. And so since the ovulation process and the formation of ovum egg does have a big role in the formation of a specific estrogen called estradiol, you start decreasing your estradiol as you start having missed menstrual cycles or anovulatory, non-ovulation periods. And so this sort of drops off. Men are a little bit different because we don't have ovulatory cycles. We actually cycle in every 24 hours. Like we go through a cycle every 24 hours. So that's why your husbands may be someone different in the morning than they are in the afternoon because for whatever reason, God designed us to cycle every 24 hours. And for men, it's a little, we really just run out. So around 40 is when we start losing 1% per year. If we're sleep deprived, have sleep apnea or stressors, we lose it faster. So men are a little bit different. Women tend to ovulate out, and men, I think, just kind of burn out.
Okay.
So then how does that then affect this idea of health, right? Not just weight gain and weight loss, because I think we've touched that, but how does that then affect our general health, and what can we do about it?
So then we think about like a biological plausibility. What do these hormones do? Growth hormone. So we'll sort of do them all. So growth hormone creates a component of growth, right? But realistically, for women at age 18 and maybe for men at age 21, our bone plates have sealed, and we're not going to get taller. So there's probably a safety mechanism to losing growth hormone because we don't want our face to grow and our liver to grow and our heart to grow. And so this is one. But interestingly enough, growth hormone is a huge lipophilic or fat burning hormone. And so this is why if you were taking silhouettes of 10-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, and 60-year-olds, you could probably pick them out based on silhouettes, not knowing anything else about them. You can see body habitus changes probably related to growth hormone and muscle structure. Next hormone is testosterone. Testosterone really is designed to help your cells synthesize or build protein. So testosterone by itself can build muscle, but it needs food and it needs resistance training in the ideal world. But as men and women lose testosterone, we lose muscle tissue. And again, this occurs at around, so ovaries make testosterone, and there are adrenal glands make testosterone for women, testicles for men make testosterone. And so this plays a huge role in protein synthesis, making muscle. So if you don't have the hormone to make muscle, it just gets harder to make muscle. And the window we usually find for men is a level of around 600. So 600 in the blood work is about the muscle building capacity. We think women are about 1/10 of that. So probably 40 to 60 is kind of the muscle building potential. And most 40 plus year old women will have a testosterone of 40 or more often 25. So this is less. So you don't have as much of the hormones to build. Estrogen is this incredibly beautiful, complex hormone, and decades can be spent trying to understand this. I was struck by one of my functional medicine lecturers studying about estrogen, saying that if you took a teaspoon of estrogen and you poured it into an Olympic-sized swimming pool, you would change the pH of the entire pool. So what estrogen does in such tiny amounts is almost overwhelming to me from a provider. That being said, estrogen does a lot of incredibly cool things, not the least of which is femininity. Okay. And then we can talk a little bit about the roles of men and women in the biblical sense in regards to that, which I'm going to shift gears. I'm going to tell you this because this came up in a conversation in the car from my daughter about the roles of men and women. And like, why did God put men, quote, in the position of authority? And I think it's a very reasonable question for a 14-year-old, 15-year-old girl to ask. And again, I don't know if I will tread very lightly on the world of submission. But that being said, I said, you realize that mom has all the power in the relationship. And she said, what do you mean? I said, mom can bring forth life. I was like, I cannot do that. I cannot do that. So she has all of the power in the relationship. I said, if she had the power and the authority in the relationship, it would go very badly. Equally, if I had all the power and the authority in the relationship, it would go very badly. So God, in his infinite wisdom and grace, has divided power and authority. Mom has all the power and I have all the authority. And I was like, I said, and that's, I think, a reasonable answer. Now, I'm not an idiot. It's just sort of like, you use the authority. I use it 1% per year, probably, because realistically in the great story, I'm supposed to I'm supposed to sanctify my wife. I'm supposed to meet her needs. I'm the servant king, which is really, how I use the quote authority. Anyway, let's go back to the idea about estrogen. So estrogen gives you the power to ovulate and give life and sustain life. Unbelievable, but I don't know any women who want to have a child when they're 80 either, so there's a reason why you kind of ovulate out. Estrogen plays a big role in bone health and bone structure. And so women who basically drop off in estrogen pattern wise tend to have more problems with their bones. Estrogen helps combat cortisol. So estrogen is sort of a stress component. Estrogen makes blood clots, because if you think back into the 19th century, when there was very poor techniques in childbirth, infection and bleeding would occur during childbirth. So the high levels of estrogen would actually protect a woman from death during childbirth. And then estrogen creates subcutaneous fat tissue, which honestly, oh no, Dee, it's what makes women beautiful. What makes women beautiful. It creates curves rather than lines.
Is that what increases at 40?
Well, the thing is, so as you start losing estradiol, which creates this component of curves, you actually shift your estradiol to some other hormones called estrone, and estrone is fat. And so you shift from estradiol, which is the young 20-year-old estrogen, to estrone, which is the older menopausal estrogen. Oh well. And so that's a shift. And then
posterior subcutaneous fat is fine. Anterior, not as well.
So centralized visceral fat, which is a masculine trait, is not sexy, right? On men or women for that matter. Right. So realistically, subcutaneous fat is what makes, I sound so sexist saying this, but it's what makes women beautiful, what makes women women. So when we look at women who go on hormone replacement therapy versus women who don't, and they actually showed, I love this study, they actually showed pictures of women on hormones and not on hormones, and they asked men to identify their age, and women on hormone replacement therapy are consistently guessed 10 years younger because of the tension in their skin and the subcutaneous fat in their face. So there's this youthful component and this curvature component and breast tissue development and hip development that makes the feminine shape. So estrogen does that. Estrogen plays with bones, protection in regards to infection and clot because it's inflammatory, and then mood stabilization because it competes with cortisol and adrenaline. But it is a wild hormone, and you want to treat it with absolute respect. That's why you find when you talk to individuals with hormone replacement therapy, even experts in the field, there's sort of a science and an art to it. So the science is very clear. You have to do it before such and such an age and for such and such a time and at such and such a dose. But every woman is fearfully and wonderfully made, let's say. And you have to really treat them all as individuals because some need more, some need less. Some will respond violently and some will respond very resistant. And so you have to have a certain art form in regards to doing this too.
That was so fascinating. Thank you.
I could do male hormone replacement therapy in my sleep. My goodness. And like female hormone replacement therapy, you have to sit and listen and pay attention. And the women have to have access to you, not necessarily 24/7, but pretty frequently, because when it goes wrong, it can go wrong fast. And worse yet, it may not necessarily go right in the beginning stages. You have to, and there's a danger. So especially because of I think it was in 2002, there was a study, the Women's Health Initiative came out in 2002, where hormones were viewed as horrible. They were giving women heart attacks and breast cancer, and we have to stop that. And since 2002, hormone replacement therapy has steadily declined. A decade later, they decided to review this study to find out most of the women in this study were 60 to 65. And menopause occurs ages 45 to 55. And so we were using data from the wrong decade to make assumptions with this 45 to 55-year-old decade. And so literally a decade of women and beyond have been harmed by this study because we just didn't look at the data correctly. And now we're trying to recapture that ground. But as we jokingly say, old scientists have to die before medical changes occur.
Right. So I want to shift gears a little bit now, going from hormones a little bit to the metabolism. So does sugar cause metabolic issues?
So can I tease that out a little bit more and ask what metabolic issues might mean? I certainly can fill in the gaps and tell you what that might mean to me. But when an individual tells me about metabolic issue, that may mean a couple of things. So I might ask the three of you, when you hear somebody say metabolic issues, what does that mean to you? And then I certainly can answer the question based on what it may mean to the three of you.
When I hear that, I think maybe there's this inability to lose weight. I guess because sugar is so connected, well, you hear it in the news, sugar is connected to weight gain. So it's like if I eat sugar, will I still be able to lose weight, or would my metabolism still rev? That's what I think when I
Okay.
hear it.
And Dee and Jennifer, is it different for you? Metabolism ideas?
Oh no, it's similar. Yeah, weight gain.
Similar components. So it's weight gain and sugar. All right. So at the end of the day, calories make you gain weight. Carbohydrates do not. And I fight against this ideology all day long because it is pervasive in the industry, and we'll talk a little bit about why it might be. So to support some of these ideas, if you take in high levels of carbohydrates or high levels of sugar into your diet, this may this will lead to higher levels of blood sugar in the bloodstream, which will require a greater secretion of insulin from the pancreas.
Mm-hmm.
As the pancreas secretes more and more insulin, just like any organ or any human being for that matter, when it's overworked, it runs the risk of burning out. And so it may, over time, not be able to make enough insulin to keep up with the level of sugar that's in the bloodstream. At that point in time, we develop what's called insulin resistance. So insulin resistance is the idea that the sugar that's in the bloodstream can't get into the cell because there's just not enough insulin to open the door to let the sugar in. This seems to be most under the influence of body composition. So how much fat tissue you have versus how much muscle tissue you have influences insulin resistance. Greater levels of fat leads to insulin resistance, greater levels of muscle leads to insulin sensitivity. And just so we're clear, if we were going to talk about a male, the ideal body fat for a male should be somewhere between 10 and 20% body fat. The ideal percent body fat for a female should be somewhere between 18 and 28% body fat. Because again, the beauty component of what a woman looks like in terms of curves as compared to lines. So sugar can lead to metabolic issues based on insulin. But I'm going to step out of the boat, so to speak, and say sugar does not lead to weight gain. And there are no studies to support that sugar leads to weight gain alone. So this is a very northern hemisphere philosophy as compared to a southern hemisphere philosophy. And so when you sort of think about like, well, what would happen if I went to South America and Africa and saw what they ate as compared to Europe and America? Okay. Mm-hmm. And so this philosophy like, oh my gosh, carbohydrates are killing us. And if you just cut carbs, then you'd wind up losing weight. The problem is that when you go to South America or the Caribbean and you see that the majority of the food sources are corn, beans, rice, and peas,
plantains,
and then you sort of say like, well, how do they stay healthy if carbohydrates are a disaster? I had the most beautiful insult handed to me when I invited one of my dear friends. She was a fellow resident. She was from Kenya. So Kathleen was from Kenya. I still love her to this day. She was an infectious disease specialist. And I said, as a completely ignorant American, I said, would you come over to our house and give us a traditional Kenyan meal? Because I thought, this would be so exotic, antelope and wildebeest and all this kind of stuff. But she brought over 3 bowls of mashed corn, mashed peas, and rice. No spices, no salt. That's all she brought. And we heated it up and mixed it. And I was like, oh, I wouldn't have thought. And she said, Kenya is poor. This is what we eat. And I said, really? I said, you don't have it. She said, oh, we're lucky if we have meat once a week. Once a week. And yet, without sounding too biased, Kenyans are constantly winning the Boston Marathon, and they're the thinnest men and women that you see. So, realistically, it's like, all right. So, does sugar lead to metabolic abnormalities? Probably a better answer is that processed foods probably leads to it more, because processed foods create a huge amount of dense calories and that don't satisfy the hunger mechanism. So it's much, much easier to eat an entire bag of potato chips than a bag of potatoes, for example. Okay. And so that is usually the calorie component that leads to the overeating, the higher fat distribution because of the weight gain, and then the insulin resistance associated with that.
Good. That's such good information. Thank you.
Yeah. Eat sugar.
Yeah.
Like it's a beautiful addictive substance, but realistically it has to be done within reason, like everything.
That would be my next question, though. What are the effects of sugar then? Because I know for me, like I personally, when I have sugar, I get headaches. I have really bad sinus issues. I don't know if it's just like that's what I've been told. So those are the symptoms. I don't avoid it, but I just do monk fruit or a different type of sweetener I love sweet things. And also another thing, when I was in Belize, I was recently in Belize, and I realized that not only do they eat, like you were saying, but they don't really have desserts there either. And I don't know if it was, my husband was like, I don't know if it's because like we're Americans and we're just used to having all these courses, or they just don't have desserts because of financial hardship, that type of thing. But yeah, that's another thing. I noticed that they didn't have a lot of sugary things like treats and stuff. They had soda, of course, but
I'd love to add to that, if I could, really talking about the idea about dessert. And so when you look at dessert, carbohydrates contain higher levels of serotonin than proteins do. So there's serotonin amino acid within proteins, but it has to compete with other amino acids. Carbohydrates contain serotonin, and they don't have to compete. And so that's why you get this joyous rush from dessert. And surprisingly enough, you always have room for dessert, okay? Because there's this serotonin component that's associated with dessert. And we don't have proteins for dessert, at least rarely. And we rarely have fats for desserts. We just have carbohydrates because of the serotonin rush. Okay. Secondarily, and I love this component, and I used to buy wholeheartedly into it until, again, you have to do the detective work and peel the layers back. So it's the idea that a sugar and cocaine light up the same areas in your brain. So you've heard that, right? So it's just like, oh, sugar is just like cocaine. It's just a different white substance. The problem is when you tease that out, staring at the Pacific Ocean and flying kites also lights up the same area of the brain. So it's like, well, wait a minute. So sugar, cocaine, flying kites, and awesome experiences light up these pleasure centers of the brain. Now we have to sort of tease this out a little bit more. Just like, well, I guess I can't have any pleasure because I'm going to become an addict to pleasure, and it's just like, well, I don't know if that's necessarily true. So I will say that refined sugars will give you an absolute rush of serotonin, which will make you feel better. This is why do you guys remember the cartoon Kathy? The cartoon character Kathy? She'd always eat ice cream when she was sad, right? And so like there's some logic to why you would go to ice cream when you're sad, because of the serotonin response to it. The refined sugars probably have a bigger effect because of the delivery of sugar into the system. So again, we can come back to the GLP-1s in regards to that because of the coordination of sugar and insulin. But refined sugars gets delivered into the system because they're almost already digested. They're in their simplest form. So they get into the system so rapidly, our body can't catch up to that. So there's this absolute rush of adrenaline and energy that we get from sugar components. And if you don't utilize those components of the sugar, like go work out and go run and go do something, you will have an absolute crash, usually 20 minutes to 30 minutes later. The funny thing is that now partly the crash is you have the aftermath of the adrenaline rush, but you also have a sugar low, which will lead you to being hungrier, going back to eat again. And so this is why many times we will empty the bag before we actually we'll eat ourselves until it's gone, And that's the only thing that stops us, because the drive of low blood sugar, which is starvation, is very powerful. But sort of on the other side, it's just like, and Jennifer, you may be able to speak to this more. Many of the quote pre-workouts that are occurring in the industry have a fair amount of refined sugars in them. And you'll see mostly younger individuals eat gummy bears and jelly beans before they go to work out. And I will tell you, my state winning track children, they have the Welch's grapefruit, the Welch's fruit chews as their go-to component at track meets, because realistically they need a huge rush of energy to go do their 400 and 800. So they're burning through the energy instead of having these highs and lows. So I do think, yeah, there's a serotonin rush, which is a full component of happiness. And then very much like, Breaking Bad and Walter White, it's just like, well, I want to get that again, so it's just sort of like I go back and I get more. So there's an addictive component I can understand. But there's also this insulinomic component where you basically get these huge sugar rushes followed by the drop, and then you get caught in this endless cycle of just feeling miserable, and it can be beaten by putting proteins into the mix. So if you have sugar and you eat protein with it, it can be beaten.
That was going to be my question. What is the tip of that? How do you keep energy levels at a good place? And I know I love a pre-workout. I pre-work out, but then I run.
Yeah,
it's not
exactly. Same with me.
You're burning off that energy. But in general, based on kind of what we've talked about and where we're at in our life, right? What are good ways to keep our energy levels steady and to keep our body healthy?
So I will tell you what, this is not original. It was from a colleague. Never eat carbs naked. And never eat carbs naked was the advice. And I always thought that was brilliant. So eating carbs with fats or eating carbs with proteins basically stabilizes the influx of the energy. Never eat carbs naked. Right?
That's so easy and simple. I like that.
Isn't it? That's why I'm stealing it from her. I actually thought it was a really spectacular idea. Never eat carbs naked. And so what I deal with my patients who basically are M&M fiends is I say, you got to eat a can of tuna fish with that. Oh, no, I'm not going to do that. And I'm like, no, you kind of have to. You have to have a cup of cottage cheese. You have to basically blend this some way so you don't have the rush and the highs and the lows, and you get caught in that downward spiral of addiction and desire. What I kind of think you're asking me, so I don't mean to put words in your mouth, is like, what would be the ideal component of a meal that could give me the most amount of energy and sustainability? And this really does have about now 120 years of research supporting it for athletic performance, weight loss, and longevity. And this is, I try to make it relatively simple in the practice. I say there's 2 rules. First rule is that you have to eat colored vegetables and plants and fruits. And there's about 6 different colors in the color spectrum that you have to consume by the end of the day. So I tell people 1 cup of every color. You can have more, and you need to eat all those by the end of the day. And for those individuals who have children who can walk and talk, so let's say older than 2, I say bring your minions to the supermarket and let them run free in the produce section with color assignments. I have 3 children, and we did this. We would assign 2 colors to every child and say, go find something for mom and dad and put it in the cart. And we would learn how to cook things. My sassy daughter would always bring back, I learned what fiddleheads were. Ugh. And she loved them because she picked them. So we learned how to cook fiddleheads, which are ferns. They're the tops of ferns. They taste like rotten asparagus as far as I'm concerned. But she loved them. Oh, God bless you if you love them. My daughter and you will get along great. And she brought a cactus pear, which I found out the thorns are actually inside the fruit, not outside. So there's little buckshots in the fruit. She loves she would just get these really crazy, cool, colorful things, and we'd have to learn how to cook them. And so it was a great community effort. So 6 colors by the end of the day. The other thing I teach is that you need to eat carbohydrates and proteins in relatively equal amounts. And then there is a somewhat minimum requirement of protein that has to be consumed by the end of the day. Not everybody agrees to this, but I'm what we'll call a muscle-centered physician or muscle-centered medicine. And so building muscle is very important in terms of longevity, in terms of insulin resistance. Next to lung capacity, it's the second leading marker of longevity. So building muscle, and you need food, resistance training, and hormones to do that. So I usually tell people, God gave you 2 hands as measuring devices, because your bone structure is about your measuring devices. A fist of protein and a fist of carbohydrates, that's a meal. And that's easy. You get your fats from the proteins that way. If you want to put butter in salad dressing, I don't ask people to limit that. But like putting like a avocado on a piece of bread and thinking that's actually a good breakfast, I think is ridiculous. You know, protein is something that you need to have in addition to carbohydrates in your colors. So
speaking on diet, what would you say is the best diet for us to follow?
So I'm going to be a jerk and answer. It's the diet that you'll stick to. So the best diet for you is the one that you'll do for the rest of your life. That being said, within that confine, within that framework, really these proteins and carbohydrate combinations with colors has the scientific background to be the greatest diet for athletic performance, weight loss, and longevity. Okay. Some people really love the aspect of the ketogenic diet, which is a very high fat content diet with low carbohydrates. And it literally is not for everybody. So what I tend to do is I try to look at global aspects of society. Where are people living the longest and the healthiest, and what do they eat? Right. And so when you look at these components that, you know, Dan Buettner actually did in his book called The Blue Zones, most individuals in the blue zones are eating a Mediterranean style diet, most of them. Okay. But, you know, if we go north and we go to the Inuits who are living in the frozen tundra, or at least taiga, I guess, because this is they have no plants and realistically no carbohydrates. So, and they live long, healthy lives with seals and whale blubber and fish. And so it's like, well, clearly the ketogenic diet has to work somewhere, because these people that are living in the places where that's in a deep freeze, they can't grow any plants. So they rely on the animals that eat the plants in the ocean and take the nutrients from them. And then they survive. But again, that's a smaller percentage of the population.
Yeah.
Some individuals swear by the ketogenic diet and they want to do it for the rest of their lives. I don't impede them from doing that. I think it's kind of socially awkward in most societies. So it gets to be really challenging. And then realistically, the new frontiers of paleo and carnivore and so on and so forth, the science has not really been teased out in them yet. But realistically, you're going to need a certain amount of what we'll call essential proteins or essential amino acids. You're going to need a certain amount of essential fats. There are no essential carbohydrates. But realistically, your brain likes carbohydrates. Your muscles like carbohydrates. You tend to have better metabolism and muscle growth with carbohydrates. And then ultimately, as Dia suggested in the original design, plants were very important.
Yeah, I really liked one of your answers to the question we asked. So I just want to get this in here, because I think we can't, like, maybe I don't want to say it right. It's not that we can't stress this enough, but it goes back to this idea of personal responsibility. And we had asked you this question about how do you stay energetic and active during post-menopause, and you had a very simple answer. Can you just share that answer here?
I said make time.
Yes.
I said make time. I mean, realistically, we make time for things that we love. I always tell people, you show me your calendar and your checkbook and I'll tell you what you love.
Facts.
And it's like, and it's incredibly challenging. I mean, you all know firsthand, like 9 o'clock comes way sooner than you ever thought. And Netflix draws you in so easily. And one of my friends lovingly bought me the family-sized container of M&Ms for Christmas. And I binged on that with, black. And I cursed the day he was born later on, because it was like, I'm a bottomless pit when it comes to M&Ms, and so it's, and then it's just, and then I find that more often than not, I'm in the movie Groundhog Day, where just every day seems the same, and days spill into weeks, spill into months, and we even, oh my gosh, it was funny. One of my friends texted me today and said, hey, we're going to go to Utah and we're going to tour all the national parks. Do you want to come with us? And my first response was actually fear. I was like, oh my gosh, you have to break out of my routine. I can't do that, And so I think that we get so stuck in our ways that we lose sight of.
That's good.
Making time for the things that we really need to do, not want to do, but need to do.
Yeah. I get mad when Rondi plans vacations. I'm like, I like my bed. I like my routine. I'm
Me
happy
too.
once we get there. But at first, it's like he's got to pull
Yeah.
away because I love my routines.
Yep.
Mhm.
You know, so I resonate with that. So, I mean, maybe on the other
And
side, it's just
and the picture of
That's
routine that comes to mind for me is Jesus at the Transfiguration, where right this massive, and Peter is like, oh my gosh, let's just stay here forever. And then it all shuts down when he says that. It's like, no, are you out of your
That's not-
mind? No, that's not it. You know.
Yeah.
So I love routine because it's stable, it's secure, it creates a false sense of stability and security.
Yeah.
And control.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
But
what
if you don't have sleep, if you don't have nutrition, if you do not have physical activity, if you do not have stress management, and you do not have community, you will not have longevity. You will not have health. You will not have wellness.
Right. And so I wanted to go back to, I believe is probably the most important question we'll ask you here today. You talked about M&Ms. Are you team peanut M&Ms or plain? This is important.
So M&M's on sale is the first one.
Answer. No, just
And I have tried them all. I will tell you that I can stop myself with plain M&Ms, but I will eat to the bottom of peanut M&Ms. That's the one
okay.
that is my
Okay.
addiction.
You're welcome
And
back here anytime.
I will go on record. My wife and children will tell. I have eaten Reese's peanut butter cups to the point of vomiting and then going back and eating more. So I know the world of addiction. You know, in deeper senses as well. Don't get me wrong. But the sugar component that can draw us in, it's just it's an incredibly powerful component. What I sometimes do, and I don't know, do you guys know the origin of sugar? Like why we started using it? It's really interesting.
I don't think that I
No.
do.
It was one of the things that was very frustrating with, I think, Queen Victoria, is because everything we sweetened everything with honey, and Queen Victoria was very frustrated with how it affected her baked goods. And so, since she was a trendsetter of her day and everybody wanted to be like the queen, they searched the far reaches of the world to find out what substance they could use in place of honey. And then they settled into the Caribbean. And they basically started doing the sugar trade. And then, unfortunately, what came out of that was actually the slave trade. So sugar has some very, very dark history in regards to that. This does not make sugar in and of itself good or bad. It's just to say that the depths of what we would go to try and find sugar really does have a dark history. And it's phenomenal. Oh my gosh, it's phenomenal. And the theories are that breast milk, being the first thing that we have as our food, has sugar in it. And so that's why we start off our life with this sustainable food that basically creates connection and safety and relationship. And so that may be some of the components about why we're drawn into it as well.
Yeah. Well, there is so much I feel like we have unpacked and talked about. And I really would love at some point to dive back into kind of those 5 components one by one and just do some short things on that. But I guess a question I'd like to ask is there something that we haven't asked you that you think is really important for us to know as women in this stage and in this age that you would say, hey, if I had to give you advice, this is what I'd really want you to know and understand that would be helpful for us?
I have 3 that come to mind, if I may say it. Okay. So one is that when you look at health and wellness and longevity and you interview individuals who are 100 years old, most of the time what they'll say is that the people that they met and the skills that they acquired and the joy that they had for life were the factors that helped them stay healthy and well. So we focus on all these pillars, but it's really interesting that the people around you and the joy that you have in your day-to-day living seems to be the real key. So actually enjoy where God has placed you is a big part of actually being healthy. The other part is don't underestimate the adventure of the mission and the ordinary. And so what is very true in Proverbs is life is referred to as a path. I can't remember, something like 600 times in Proverbs. Okay. And how we navigate a path is the monotony of left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. And it's actually the beauty of monotony and consistency that creates health and wellness. Okay. And the
Wow.
last thing that I would say, and I don't take this advice as well as I should, but I heard this from the late Tim Keller. And I hold to this whenever my friends or myself are going through a very tough time, in that Tim Keller once said that if you had the mind of God, you would pray for exactly what is happening to you right now. Okay. So those are the things that I think really need to be said in regards to sometimes we as human beings worry about the nuances and the details, and we lose the big picture. And we lose sight of the fact that we make our choices, but God determines outcomes. And that sometimes you just need to rest in grace, because that's somewhere of the aspects of health and wellness really do occur.
Beautiful. That's really, really beautiful. Thank you for that. Dee or Tiffany, any last words that you wanted to share?
No, I just want to say thank you. This has really been an amazing conversation. I mean, I've learned so much and have been encouraged, inspired, convicted on some things. And so I just want to thank you. Thank you so much. And the work that you do, it's so needed, because you don't find too many doctors who have like bedside manner, who truly care for their patients. You kind of feel like, hey, I'm just a number or a name on their book today, and they just going to prescribe me some medicine and I'm out the door. And so to have a doctor that actually cares about a personalized approach, sees a person as an individual and not as money, a dollar sign, then that's encouraging. That's been an encouragement to me. Like, hey, there are good doctors out there. It's like a mechanic, right? Like,
Sure.
you believe all mechanics want to take advantage of women and take money. So to see that, you know what, God, you're right. It reminds me of the Bible when who was it, Elijah, who thought like, I'm the only one left, God.
Yeah.
Like, it's just me out here. But the Lord has, more soldiers out there in the battlefield. So that's been a huge encouragement. So thank you for your work.
Well, you're very welcome.
Yeah, I want to echo that. And I truly, I was just thinking of how to say it, but I'm just in awe of how you have continued your education. I have so much respect for you in that and how you share it. I come from a background of having some distrust with doctors because of that reason. And I feel like you've put so much time and energy into it, and it's highly respected by me. And I'm so grateful that you shared that with me. I've learned so much. And it's just like Tiffany said, like, there's out there, you just gave me a glimmer of hope. There are doctors out there that are doing the work, continuing their education, and truly learning and growing as they practice. Because some, they get their degree and they just start their practice, and then they're just there and they just use what they commonly see as their precedents. But you are continuing to do the work and grow and educate yourself, which is highly commendable and respectable.
Well, thank you very much, ladies. I have to admit, Jennifer's husband, Rondi, we've been back and forth, and I really want to thank all of you for asking me to come on, because I have equally developed a certain amount of frustration and cynicism of the monotony of left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot, knowing that that is an important part of mission. However, there's a creative part that has been missing in my life for a very long time. And it's absolutely marvelous that the timing of your asking me coincided with that, so I could actually explore and kind of get reacquainted with that part of my life as well.
I can't wait to have you back again.
Yeah, I know, me too.
So for our listeners, we are going to have Dr. K on a regular. He has already, we've taken up on his invitation for that. So he will be here on a regular basis. So if you enjoyed this episode and you have so many more questions for Dr. K, please let us know, message us, DM us, or let us know in the Wives Club. That would be fantastic. We're going to continue this conversation. We actually had a list of questions that we had for Dr. K, and we are going to continue this in the Ardent Wives community. So definitely be there. If you're not part of our community, we would love to have you there. We are growing passionate wives. And so you can go ahead and check in the comments down below and just click there, and we will add you in and continue on this conversation. And Dr. K will be back very soon for a new episode, and we're so grateful for his time today. So as we continue to cry together, laugh together, and grow closer to Jesus, we are just so glad that you're here with us to do that too. Be blessed, and until next time.